Hello and welcome back to Why We Write Fantasy. I'm Oscar Cesena,
And I'm KJ Aiello.
and today we're going to be talking about why we like and why Greek mythology is important for us.
Not why we like, why we love Oscar. Let's just,
Yeah, that's true.
yeah,
Yeah,
the
I
why
mean,
we're
yeah.
obsessed. Yeah.
Before we jump in, I just want to remind everybody to like and subscribe if you like what we do here. Follow us on Instagram and subscribe on the podcast if you're listening to the audio version.
Yes.
Okay, so KJ, why don't you start? I mean, we both love Greek mythology, and we all have our stories. But let's
hmm
begin with like the origin story of like how did little KJ discovered Greek mythology?
Oh boy. I think my Greek mythology, my adoration of Greek mythology was born out of my adoration of ancient Egyptian mythology.
Mm,
So when I was growing up, all of my school projects, I somehow warped them into something to do with ancient Egypt. I
hmm
was obsessed with ancient Egypt. And I was so obsessed that my first big vacation, not vacation, but travel experience all by myself, I went to Egypt, and it was just, I
Oh,
will never forget that. And it was just, everything came to life. And there was so much about me that came to life on that trip, about my creativity and my confidence in my own self and the thoughts that I had. And my writing started from that trip as well. So
hmm
from that, it was just sort of like an extension. The following year
yeah,
I went to Greece, and then I thought, you know what, this is it. I'm hooked. So good. So, I mean, it has been there wasn't a little KJ moment, but it has been very much an evolving
mm,
adoration in my adult years. And I'm so glad right now to see such a resurgence of all these Greek mythology retellings and novels. I mean,
yep,
I know it did not begin with Madeline Miller's Song of Achilles, but I do think that that was a very much a pivotal point, not just in, literature, but I think for me as well, because I realized that what may have, what we've had for so long may not be the only way to tell something.
hmm
Right? Maybe there is a different perspective. And
yeah,
I don't know if anybody who is listening, I'm sure there are a lot of people who are watching and listening who have been like, yeah, Song of Achilles, it destroyed me in the most best way possible. Um, but like, I don't know if we would have gotten a retelling like that when I was falling in love with
yeah,
ancient Greek mythology, or definitely not when I was falling in love with ancient Egyptian mythology.
mm,
But, in like one of our previous episodes, we were also talking about inspiration, and there is this is a treasure trove of lore, of um, parables, of moralistic lessons, of characters, and there's so much about human psychology and motivations that are entrenched in the Greek mythic tales, from Herodotus, the histories,
yeah,
to all of the demigod, and the God gifted um, heroes, like I don't know who else, Odysseus, that sort of thing. There's so much about it that just is so human,
yeah,
right? That I absolutely love.
yeah,
So I think that's kind of, again, it wasn't a pivotal moment for me, but I do think that it has been an ongoing, evolving adoration and respect,
yeah.
right?
I
How about
haven't
you?
I haven't read the Song of Achilles, but I read Circe or Circe. I don't even know. I never know how to pronounce it. I read that one as soon
hmm
as it came out. I remember I
Yeah.
was at Indigo. It was like this just came out like this week. It's like it sounded really good. I got it. I
hmm
don't remember if I recommended that to you, KJ, but I recommended it to other of my on my. Yeah, I did. Okay,
You
yeah,
did. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. But I was reading. It's like this is so good,
hmm
and I remember getting it, and it's like this is amazing. Yes,
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 right
yes,
here.
yeah.
Yes, so good.
It's such a good book. But what I wanted to say, like talking about like the first time that when I discovered Greek mythology. So
Mhm,
just a little background. As you know, I mention all the time that I was born and raised in Mexico.
mhm,
Um, when I was a kid, I was in grade six, and
mhm,
one of our projects was we're talking about like Greek history, Greek mythology, and all
mhm,
those things. And one of our projects was to do I don't know, like I guess like a essay of
mhm,
something about the Greek history, like,
mhm,
and I picked mythology.
Right.
and I started being getting fascinated with all these monsters and the Minotaur
Mm.
and Hades and all those things. And I remember going to my grandparents' home, and they had like a massive library. And I
Mhm.
got there, and I found they had, I don't know if it was like three or six. I don't remember. There was a lot of books. I was a kid,
Yeah.
so, and they were big. And I asked my grandfather and my grandmother, like, hey, I'm looking for some Greek mythology. It's like, oh, we have this, and they just
Yeah.
dumped that on me. It's
I
like, okay,
love that. I
uh,
love it.
it was amazing. And I started reading, and there was a lot of
Yeah.
history and all that, but one of the tomes was just about mythology.
Mm.
And I remember I took that one home and I read it, and I got all
Mm.
my full essay out of that one. So for
Oh,
me, it
wonderful.
was one of the first times that I knew there was something out of, and this was before I discovered fantasy. Like this was
Yeah.
a year, or yeah, like a year before I discovered Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Um, but for me, this was like, this is exactly what I'm looking for. I want
Yeah.
heroes, I want monsters, I want
Yeah.
high stakes, I want gods, I want all
Mhm.
those things. So for me, that was the moment when I discovered that. And since then, I just been like reading as much as I can,
Yeah.
seeing as much as I can. That's what I got, Cersei. When I saw it, it's like, okay, Greek
Yeah.
mythology, Cersei. Okay, this is a nymph that I don't think when I got it, I don't think I knew who she was until
Yeah.
I read the book, because there's so many characters
Oh
in
my god, yeah, there's
yeah.
so
So
many of them.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I didn't know, but I kind of read it, it's like, okay, this sounds pretty cool. Like
Yeah.
she's the daughter of one of the Titans, and I always loved the conflict between the Titans all the gods of
Helios.
Olympus. I love those
Yes.
those things, so it's like, okay, I'm gonna grab this. So I got it, I read
Yeah.
it, and I started recommending it to everybody who asked
Yeah.
for a book. It's like, oh, I'm looking for a business book.
Yeah.
You know what? Forget about business. Read
Yeah.
Cersei.
Yeah, you need to read this. That's what I love about it too, and I do actually recommend if you enjoyed Circe, definitely read The Song of Achilles. I mean, this book, I think it's still a trends on Book Talk and Bookstagram because it is, and that's 10 years out. It
Yeah.
is so phenomenal, and it tells it from the perspective of Achilles, actually the perspective of Achilles' companion, Patroclus. So we all
Hmm.
know
Yeah.
from, like, if you've seen the Troy movie with Brad Pitt, it
Oh
there
yeah, I
was,
forgot about that movie.
yeah, but they did not
I
actually,
don't
they
think it was a
weren't,
good movie.
I mean, I had Brad Pitt, so it was perfectly acceptable for me, but it didn't actually do justice to the relationship between Patroclus and Achilles, and they were actually lovers.
Hmm.
And at that point in our, zeitgeist, in our time in the early 2000s, that probably wouldn't have been acceptable.
Hmm.
So what Madeline Miller did was she told that story, and it's so wrenching, right? And I mean, the story is already written for itself, but how she did it, just the writing style itself, how, and we never are in Achilles's mind. We always see him through this basically, like, it's not entirely, excuse me, it's not entirely a reliable narrator of
Yeah.
Patroclus because he's always witnessing this demigod who moves like, water, and he's such a ruthless killer, but he's always witnessing him with such reverence and absolute adoration. So anyways, yeah, you need
Good
to
book
read.
recommendation.
It's
Yeah.
a good book. I can't get enough. It
Okay,
destroyed
so
my soul. Yes.
that's great. Okay, so what else do you like? Like we just talked about quickly
Mhm.
on how we discovered Greek
Yeah.
mythology. I've never been in Greece, so it's one of the things that I want to do.
Yeah.
But like how, because the way I'm thinking, like I love. I mentioned this. I think I mentioned this every single episode, but I love TTRPGs, and
Mhm.
one of the things I like about TTRPGs is that you get monsters, and doesn't
Mm.
really matter where they come from. They
Mhm.
are like, you can be fighting a dragon that looks like a Chinese dragon,
Mhm.
and then the minions of the dragon are going to be minotaurs, which are like a
Mm.
completely different origins. So I really like those
Mhm.
things. So I remember when I started playing Dungeons and Dragons, which was kind of on the
Mm.
time I was 13, almost 14 years old. Sorry, 14, almost
Mhm.
15 years old, and I remember looking at all these things, and I really liked the, back then it was Dungeons and Dragons Second Edition, and they had like a little. like a couple of paragraphs of lore
Mhm.
on how to use these monsters in your world, not
Nice.
not how they were used in mythology. So
Right.
it just started getting me a lot of things to think about. Like I remember one time I wrote a campaign about a demon lord who was basically the demon lord of minotaurs, and the minotaurs
Mhm.
were their minions, and
Mhm.
my characters were fighting that, and we're trying to them liberate the minotaur race from the
Right.
demon lord, to all those things. Like I was trying to make it epic. It was like a lot of years ago, maybe like 20 years ago, but maybe
Yeah.
more, like 25. But those things. So it just started getting all this ideas, like the
Yeah.
labyrinth, like the Minotaur's labyrinth, or like even things like when you like the Odyssey. Whenever the Odyssey and Iliad,
Mhm.
and use the whole journey through the seas. And I remember when I read it, I was still young, and for me, it was like, how, like, are they going through the whole Pacific Ocean? Like, this is taking so long. But then you just
Yeah.
think about, like, okay, they don't have motorboats.
Yeah, no,
Like,
it takes
yeah,
a while to get
it
across the
takes a while.
Mediterranean.
Exactly, it's the Mediterranean. It's like, well,
Yeah.
yeah, you can do that pretty quick now, but back then it was all those
Mhm.
things, and then you have
Mhm.
sirens and
Mhm. Scylla and
all those
yes.
things. So I just became fascinated. And I think what
Yeah.
fascinated me most was the interaction between the gods and mortals. That
Yes.
you have gods having children with mortals, and then they
Yeah.
become demigods, and there's all this interaction, which
Mhm.
by the time that I discovered it, I mean, I was raised atheist, and
Mhm.
my only contact with religion, especially in Mexico, was the Catholic Church. So it's
Yeah.
like there's one God, and this God doesn't interact with
Yeah.
mortals.
Yeah.
So,
There's
so for me,
inaccessibility there.
exactly, and that just I
Yes.
just became
Mhm.
fascinated with that. So for me, it's like, okay, if I'm writing something that is fantasy, I want the
Yeah.
gods to walk the earth. I want the
Yeah.
gods to have their chosen ones. I just
Yes.
became all this inspiration and all this influence that I had right now. It was kind of born there.
Mhm.
So it was honestly, it was a very, very interesting thing for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, even for me when I was in Greece and, wandering around in like Crete and Mykonos and, the landscape is just, it's otherworldly. And it was so easy for me as I remember on roads, it just looking around going, okay, I can see how gods and demigods and these mythical monsters and creatures were the explanations for so many of the geological and whatever happenings in the land thousands of years ago, even
Hmm.
2-3,000 years ago. I can understand how these monsters and gods provided an explanation for everything
Yeah.
that happened, that felt so inexplicable. You think of the island of Thera, it just, like, exploding, which is now Santorini, it
Hmm.
exploding. How would that be explained by people living on Crete? How would they
Yeah.
have been able to explain that other than Hephaestus or Ares losing their shit? Like, it just makes sense. It is so it's like a divine intervention.
Yeah.
And it makes and yes, like you were saying before, there is an accessibility to this mythology, to the lore, to the gods that we don't have in our monotheistic religions.
Right.
And that is part of the monotheistic religions is that inaccessibility.
Yeah.
That is like basically one of the foundations of it. So it makes for really rich pickings when it comes to writing. There's so much to choose from. There's a treasure trove, and we have access to so many different tropes and storylines. And I mean, if you wanted to write something about Odysseus, all you have to do is pick one of the 10 years he was gone and you can get a full novel out of that,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's absolutely amazing.
I mean, he
Um,
appears in Cersei, like when we're
he
talking
does.
about this book, like he's
He
there,
does.
and
Yeah.
it's just like a secondary character in this book, even though he has like is a massive
Yeah.
character in the Greek mythology.
Yeah. And I love how we see Odysseus from, Circe's perspective, that he's not quite the hero, but he is more representative of the oppressive nature that would be subjugated on women
Yeah.
in ancient Greece and Grecian culture, like in the
Yeah.
Athenian culture, women were very much subjects to the men. They were owned, they were, cloistered away, that sort of thing. So it kind of makes sense that Odysseus in would have this kind of the nature that he does have, because we're seeing it through her perspective. And at that point, she's getting pretty pissed off with the world of men. And I
Yeah.
literally men.
Yeah.
She's
Yeah.
getting pretty upset. She was hard done by. She
Yeah.
was done dirty a lot. So that's one of the things I think is really cool about Greek mythology, is the amount of times that we can actually retell these if we just tell it from a different perspective,
Mm-hmm.
right? Instead of telling it from, say, Perseus's point of view, why don't we tell it from Medusa's point of view? And you get books like Stone Blind,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
Or if somebody writes the story of Scylla, Scylla was a
Yeah.
woman who basically was punished, probably because she was a woman. I think that's just
Who
such a
also
great,
appears in Circe.
yeah, who also appears in Circe. She appears somewhere else too, but I can't remember. But
Oh well,
anyways,
yeah.
yeah,
That's one of the things I like. There's so much like references, and because you're
yeah.
retelling the story from
Hmm.
a point of view that has been never used, you can do
Hmm.
whatever you want. So this is pretty cool.
Yeah. It is so cool. And I also like, so I was, plugging myself here, but when I was writing my book, I have a chapter on monsters, and it's basically how monsters, first of all, have been done dirty. And we know that. I think it's pretty much a resounding agreement that, politically and moralistically and, socially, monsters have been done dirty. But particularly monsters like, female monsters and that sort of thing, of how they have become these lessons that we must learn, like something, if you do this you will become Medusa,
Hmm.
or if you did do this you will become Scylla, or something like that.
Yeah.
So when I was writing my book, I was diving into all these different sort of like perspectives on monsters, and a lot of them were in Greek mythological monsters. So I was reading books like, this is very academic, but it's a collection of essays called Monster Theory, edited by Jeffrey Jerome Cohen. And one of the ones was that it was so fascinating that monsters always live on the periphery and the margins of our existence. So they represent the other, they represent the unknown.
Hmm.
I mean, which makes sense in Greek mythology. You think of like a volcano exploding, it's obviously a monster because there's so much that's unknown, right?
Yeah. Totally.
Even lands like, and this is another one of the books that I dove into on monsters. Again, it's a collection of essays written by Stephen T. Asma, and he talks about how monsters, even today, explain so much of our psychology. Now he goes into a lot of other monsters, from across the world, but he does talk about some of the monsters from Greek mythology. But to me, these monsters, and particularly in Greek mythology, they represent so much more. So, and this is why they're so easy to write, to rewrite these stories, is because you
Yeah.
can say, okay, I'm going to take this theme from it, or I'm going to be like, I don't know if this monster is quite what we've always assumed them to be. Again, going back to Medusa, she was a
Yeah.
victim of assault.
Yeah.
So she
She was
became a
punished because she was the victim.
monster.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then she was punished to become a monster, but because of that, that injustice, her rage, her anger ended up becoming the monstrous part. So it's like,
Mhm.
one of the things that I wrote is like, if you corner a puppy and kick it, that puppy will become a monster. You
Yeah.
can't then blame the monster for not being a puppy. And that's exactly what happens with these monsters. And it's like, I see this in Greek mythology. You see it again and again and again. And even with, the monstrous, and I've got air quotes
Mhm.
here, the monstrous gods and demigods, some of the monstrous actions that they take. Sometimes it's like, well, why are they doing this? What lesson are we learning from this? And that's what I love so much about it.
Yeah.
Is,
Yeah.
you constantly be thinking about this.
Yeah.
I can think
It's
about it forever.
I can see that.
Yeah.
Okay. There's and the thing is that this has inspired so many things,
Yeah.
like retelling. You're saying, like, I
Mhm.
just last week I went to the theater with my wife to see Hadestown,
Mhm.
and it's a musical, and it's about the story. I forgot the names. Eurydice and
Mhm.
Orpheus. Eurydice
Yes.
and Orpheus, and it's a story on how, like, Eurydice dies, goes to Hades, and then
Mhm.
Orpheus goes down and tries to rescue her. Uh,
Mhm.
I mean, spoiler alert for 3,000 years ago. Um, like he cannot rescue her, and in the end,
Yeah.
they stay separated. But
Yeah.
one of the things I liked this was like the story starts something like a bar. Like
Mm.
the scenography is it's a bar. There are people drinking, there are people dancing and singing, and it's like it's a really interesting way to retell a story that is this old.
Mhm.
So I really like those things. And another one, I think you're going to talk more about this, but
Mhm.
like the Assassin's Creed Odyssey, they
Yes.
did a great job
Oh,
recreating
beautiful.
that world.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
I think from my point of view, I think this is the best Assassin's Creed game that has been published.
Mhm.
There's others that are good, but I really liked it. The
Mhm.
hundreds of hours that I put in there, I maybe put like a I don't know. I want to say like at least 100 hours that I played there. I know you played
Mhm.
like 2,000, but
Yeah,
it's
half a lifetime.
yeah, but it's really well done. It's like they
It
capture
is.
the essence of Greece at the time,
Mhm.
and it's also mixed with mythology. You fight mythical creatures. Like I remember fighting
Yeah.
Cyclops.
Minotaur.
You fight a Minotaur. You fight
Yeah.
I think a Gorgon or something like that. I don't remember. Like
The
there's so
Gorgon,
many things.
yeah.
Yeah, you fight the
Yeah.
Gorgon. Yeah,
Who is Medusa? Medusa in one of the tellings
right,
is one of the Gorgon three sisters.
right.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting thing. So
Yeah.
when you were playing that game, with
Mhm.
all the love that you have for Greek mythology and all the love that you have for that game, um, what were your thoughts when you're playing that game?
Mm.
Besides all the inspiration and everything that came with it, like, is there anything in particular that caught your attention?
Yeah, fan fiction. Like, I mean, that's my really, like, first rapid response is actually fan fiction, and this is the one of the amazing things about fan fiction is actually you can take something that you feel like, um, didn't get the service it got, or you weren't quite happy with how the author or, the writers of, say, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, because there's
Yep,
also video game fan fiction too.
yep,
And you can tell it in the way that you wanted it to be written in the first place.
yep.
So I just thought about, when I'm still playing it. Like I was playing it last night. Okay. Um, I know Oscar's shaking his head
It's
like,
just
come
like
on, there are
there's
other
so many
games.
good games.
Not like I have an emotional investment in this game now. Like, hi Ubisoft, okay, can you please sponsor us? Um, um, so when I play this game, I think about, different, I guess, storylines, different stakes, different characters who can actually be entrenched in this world. And there are some things like I don't like how they portrayed Persephone in Elysium, but I loved the anxiety and this desperate need for control that she had over this plot of land that Hades, her husband and also kidnapper,
Mhm.
like it's just a terrible story that the amount of control that she has is based out of the only thing that she can control in her life, her immortal life, which is kind of bananas to think about that she is a prisoner in this underworld, and the only thing she has been given to her by the man who stole her. Of course, she would be a little, controlling and possessive and pissed off. And that's kind of how she comes off in the game, but
Mhm.
she's also a bit villainized for that too. So if I'm sorry, Ubisoft, please still sponsor us. Um, obviously, they're listening. Um, and that's one of the fan fiction things that I would do is I would kind of turn that on its head. Right. So this is how
There you
it's,
go.
Greek mythology is entrenched into my brain. I have so many plot bunnies. It's becoming a problem. Yeah. So that's me.
Yeah, it's yeah. I think it's one of the things that I like about mythology, and
Hmm.
because it's something that people believed in. It was their
Yeah.
religion. It was not fantasy, and that's one of the things
Yeah.
that I don't like when people call mythology or even religion. Even as I said, I was raised atheist. I don't like when people say religion is fantasy. I don't like that. I don't like when people say mythology is fantasy, because this is part of civilization. This is part of
Mhm.
how people believe the world was created, and they actually
Mhm.
believed it. Fantasy, we all know that it's fantasy.
Mhm.
Nobody is going to create a religion out of the name of the wind, or Lord of the Rings, or like
I Lord
nobody's
of the
going to.
Rings, I feel like people already
I mean,
have.
there's a lot of people who love that. I love Lord of
Yeah.
the Rings. I think I always mention it, like every episode, but it's not something that we would never believe that that was something that happened. What
Right.
happens with religions and mythologies is that the story of the world and the story of the
Mhm.
of
It's
all the
told through.
stories that are coming in are, they believed in, and they molded their society like that.
Right,
So
like, it's an explanation for what was inexplicable at the
yes,
time.
yeah,
Absolutely, and it
yeah,
makes sense, like and like I was saying before, going to Greece, it's just like, yeah, okay, it
yeah,
all makes sense, and if
yeah,
I was here 2,500 years ago, hells yeah, I would be believing in these gods and
yeah,
creatures, and it's
yeah,
some areas are just so inhospitable and overwhelming in an absolutely beautiful, awful, as in filled with awe kind
yeah,
of way,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah.
I think like the fantasy aspect of it too, there's a huge marketing element there too. So it's like, where do you place something like the Song of Achilles? Where do you place it?
I think you
In
were telling me
indigo or
that they put in historical fiction or something like
it's in
that.
historical fiction, and I have a bone to pick with that because there is a historical element to it, but it's not
Yeah,
his to me, it's not historical fiction. But
it's
where do you
mythology.
place this in Barnes and Noble, in
Yeah,
Waterstones, in Indigo? Where do you place it? So
yeah,
there is an aspect there of like how marketing crosses over into literature, right?
yeah,
And like the construction of literature and our ideas of genres and tropes,
yeah. And
right?
I kind of understand the fantasy elements because they're
Mhm.
fantastical elements, and
Fantastical. Yeah.
but I think I think this should be just a small little shelf that says mythology. That's it. Like,
Absolutely,
because
yes.
I get the idea of historical fiction because
Yeah.
it's history in a way,
Mhm.
because people believed in it, was their religion, was
Yeah.
their the creation mythos, all those things.
Mhm.
So that's the historical part,
Mhm.
and then you're creating a fictional story out of that.
Mhm.
So I kind of
Mhm.
get the historical fiction, but I don't think it's 100% accurate. But again, what
Yeah.
is accurate when we
We're
are
talking about
like
marketing, though.
categorizing? Yeah, like there's
Yeah.
so many, I don't know, fantasy stories that have a hint of sci-fi and the other way around.
Yeah.
We're talking previous in another episode. We're talking about Star Wars. Like it's sci-fi, and I'm again, or like quote unquote sci-fi, because for me the force is magic. So you have all these things that are putting in together. So, but if you go to a bookstore and you
Yeah.
want to find something about Star Wars, it's going to be in the sci-fi section,
Even though
not in
it's
the
magic.
fantasy section. Even though
Yeah.
the force is magic,
Yeah.
right? So there's so many things. It's gonna. I think it's gonna be very very hard. And as
Yeah.
humans, we like to have categories, and we like to have
Hierarchies and
clean
yes.
lines on
Yes.
what each one of the things mean,
Yeah.
and that is just not going to happen, especially when
It's
we're
not.
dealing about this thing. So
Yeah, the bookstores are already struggling. Let's not make it more complicated for
yeah,
them.
yeah,
Yeah.
maybe
So
just find the author you're looking for and buy their books, and that's it.
maybe, yes, or maybe just, like, spend the afternoon browsing and take a
Yeah,
chance on something different,
yeah,
right? Always
exactly.
take a chance on something different. I do have an amazing recommendation, and I think you're gonna be picking up a copy pretty soon because I keep forcing you to. If you're looking for a treasure trove of ideas, I picked up this it's so heavy, it's a brick of a book, it's called Classical Mythology A to Z, an encyclopedia of gods, goddesses, heroes, and heroines. Annette Geiske. I'm so sorry. I cannot pronounce this.
So the correct name will be in the notes.
It will be in the notes, okay? I'm actually really bad at pronouncing any kind of names. But basically it is an encyclopedia of all the gods, goddesses, monsters, yada yada yada, heroes, but it's for me it's just such a great reference even on a Friday night when I'm like, oh, I'm kind of feeling like I want some inspiration but I'm not really
Hmm.
sure what I want to dig into, so I just kind of start flipping through and I learn about somebody completely random. So pick up a copy if you can. It's a great thing to have on your shelf. It looks good, it feels good, it is great. Oscar's getting a copy
I'm
today, he
actually
has
getting
no
a copy.
choice.
Yeah, no, I'm
Yeah.
actually doing that. Is Okay, well, this was a great recommendation. I'm actually picking up
Yes.
my copy. I don't know if it's going to be today, but it's going to be pretty
Yeah,
soon. I
today.
like those things.
Today.
In a more gamey way. I don't know if
Gamey.
that's a call gamey, but
No, it's
sometimes when I want to get some inspiration as well, I just grab
yeah.
the bestiaries that I have for my games, and I
Yes.
like that they have this little explanation of what each one of the
Yeah.
monsters does. I have, I don't know, I think I have like maybe
Can you
five or
show us one?
six bestiaries. Yeah, I can.
Show
So
us one, Oscar. Tell us what one it is. And even for, non-gamers, these are
so
really great treasure troves, right?
they are, yeah. So this is one that I have is the bestiary one for Pathfinder.
Mhm.
And anyway, I'm just gonna open it randomly. So we have a
Yeah.
lich here,
Yes.
and
Oh,
it's
so
pretty cool
cool.
because it has really good, like amazing art, and has an
Yeah.
explanation of what the lich is and all that. And then
Mhm.
you have the game stats, which is
Yeah.
something that you're gonna do later. But I have that one. I have the Dungeons and Dragons monster manual that I
Mhm.
used when I used to play Dungeons and Dragons. I have the
Mhm.
Tome of Beasts 1 and 2 by Cobble Press.
Mhm.
There's so much stuff here. So
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting. It's not, I wouldn't use it as you're using the book that you mentioned, which I think it's awesome.
Mhm.
But for me, it's just like a way to get inspired. I usually get
Yeah.
inspired, and when I get inspired, just write an adventure, and I just
Yeah.
make my players go and fight this monster that I just found.
Yeah.
But it's a really cool thing to do. So I really like what you
Yeah.
said about using these things. It's like you said, like a Thursday night or Friday night, just like reading through it and getting inspired. And we just talk about
Yeah.
inspiration, and this is another way to get inspired
Yes.
with
There's so many
stories. Like,
ways.
yeah, you
Yes.
can either find a villain, an amazing villain, or
Mhm.
you can find a hero, depending on the type
Yeah.
of story you want to tell.
And find ways to write them into not the hero.
Yeah, that would be
Like there's
interesting.
it just really depends on the perspective that it's being written from.
Totally.
Odysseus isn't always a hero.
Yeah,
I think it's
exactly.
so cool. Yes. All right. Well, thank you, Oscar.
I think it was a really fun episode. I hope people
Yeah.
enjoyed it. And again, just a reminder: if you enjoy what we're doing and everything, just like and subscribe.
Yes.
In YouTube, or if you prefer the audio version, just go to your podcast app, find Why
Mhm.
We Write Fantasy, subscribe so you get a notification every time we launch a new episode. Um,
Yes. And check us out on Instagram at Why We Write Fantasy. Use the hashtag Why We Write Fantasy and WWWF. We are checking it out. Send us a DM. We want to hear your thoughts. We want to hear what inspires you too. Tell us what you think of classical Greek mythology or any other kind of mythology. We are always on the lookout for other ideas and to see what our readers see. Again, we're
Again,
all going to be
readers.
best-selling novelists. All of our listeners and viewers, what you have to say. We want to hear from you.
We do. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and happy writing.